Israelis are settlers, and their descendants are the descendants of settlers. This is what we need to understand. So we need to always use this terminology. There's no room for Zionism in a future state which includes them as well as the indigenous Palestinian people. There's no room for Zionism. It's an ideology which is absolutely contrary to liberation, to the kind of state that I'm envisioning. You see, the starting point of this talk about what presumably is a one democratic state in the future is Palestinian rights. It's not how do you accommodate the Jewish Israelis and the Palestinian Arabs in one space. No, you first start, how do you put right the injustices that have been visited on the Palestinian people? They have primacy. They have to return home. And then we talk about the population that is going to live in that new state.
Salamat everyone. You are listening to Red Inverted Triangle. This show is about the ongoing struggle for liberation in Palestine, produced on the unceded lands of the Gadigal people. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Like Palestine, Australia is the ground zero of a genocide that has been occurring for over 200 years and continues to this day. From the river to the sea, this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. My name is Ahmed. I am a Palestinian living on this stolen land, and I'll be your host. This podcast aims to provide the Palestinian story, the Palestinian narrative. It's necessary because we live in a heavily indoctrinated society where, as Palestinians, being able to speak, to tell our stories and narrate is the ultimate form of resistance. That's right, resistance, hence the name of our show, Red Inverted Triangle. Each week, we'll be bringing you different segments, such as news updates from Palestine, Palestinian music, interviews with Palestinian figures or non-Palestinian figures talking about Palestine, and everything else related to Palestine. Thanks for tuning in, and long live the resistance. This episode of Red Inverted Triangle, we are bringing you a conversation I've had with Dr Ghada Karmi. Dr Ghada Karmi is a Palestinian doctor born in Jerusalem and was forced to leave her home with her family during the Nakba 1948. She is a former research fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies, University of Exeter, author of many books including One State and In Search of Fatima. I hope you'll find my conversation with Dr. Ghada Karmi useful and productive. Enjoy. Dr. Ghada, what an absolute honor. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me, and greetings to everyone watching.
You are very welcome. Dr. Ghada, I know your time is limited, so I'm just going to delve right into it. But before we start, I want to get first your reflection on the current state of affairs in Palestine and globally as well, as a result of this ongoing genocide that's happening back home in Gaza. And, you yourself have gone through the atrocities and the horrors of the Nakba in 1948. So if you could also tell us, what does that tragedy of the Nakba, how does it feature in your memory when you witness what's happening back home in Gaza right now?
Well, to start with, in terms of the Nakba of 1948, it's important for people to understand I was a child at the time, and therefore my memories are a bit limited. Nevertheless, the dislocation, the disruption, the fact that we had to flee from Jerusalem to Damascus first, because my grandparents lived there, and we took refuge with them. And then after a year or so, we then had to flee again. Well, we had to leave again to go much further afield, in our case, to the United Kingdom, to London. I mean, this is horrific for a child, really. This dislocation, this change of environment, for no reason that I could understand at the time. You know, it wasn't a time where people sat with children and said, look, you know, we're having to do this because of this, but don't worry. There wasn't any of this because I suppose the adults were too distraught themselves to sit down and think about the children. So bearing those constrictions in mind, that my memory isn't that great, even then, I can assure you, those sufferings, which I thought were bad enough, pale into insignificance by comparison to the nightmare that is happening in Gaza. This is a situation which I think all your viewers are well aware of. We've been watching for the last 2 years. It's beyond any epithet I can think of to describe it. It went from being incredible, unbelievable, etc., to monstrous, obscene, depraved, because that's the only way you can describe the suffering and the horror being visited on the population of Gaza. But really, you know, I do want to stress something important. We could spend the whole session talking about the vileness of the Israeli army, the monstrous behavior, what they've done to the Palestinian people and to Gaza, not to speak of the West Bank, of course, which they're also tormenting and taking over as we speak. Now, my point is that we could spend all our time talking about that, but I don't think that's useful. I think people are well aware of what's happening. There is really only one question which should engage us all, and that is, how do you stop it? It's got to be stopped. And so that drags in a whole other load of questions about how it was allowed to happen anyway, how it's being allowed to happen anyway, what is going on with world leaders, especially Western leaders, and in that I include Australia and New Zealand. What is going on with these leaders that they can allow this to happen? You see, I think if we spent our energies now on trying to unravel this question and trying to answer it, that would help the people of Gaza far more than detailing the horrors that they're going through.
Absolutely. And I mean, talking about actions as well, I want to get into that, but I do want to get your reflection on the mobilization that we see around the globe, you know, the level of activism. You know, we've been talking before we started the webinar about, you know, the rallies that we've been having here in Sydney and, you know, the rally across the bridge. We have huge numbers, unprecedented numbers. But yet, you know, there's the leadership as well that we have to focus all our activism and organizing. You know, recently, 2 years later, you know, the recent voting in the International Association of Genocide Scholars finally came out and wrote a report that Israel is committing a genocide. The recent UN report as well, you know, lists the horrific actions of the Israeli army in Gaza. I mean, what difference does all these acknowledgements mean to the Palestinians? Are they going to be helping in stopping the genocide and stopping the killing in Gaza?
Okay. Now, you started your comment by talking about the popular response to what's been going on in Gaza. And you're quite right to do so, because in my remarks, when I said we need to ask the question of how it can be stopped, I didn't mean to imply that nobody was trying, at least trying to do something. Not so, not so. The reality is that we have a complete gulf between the leaders of states all over the world, really, and the people of those states. And what has been very encouraging, not only for people like me, but for the people of Gaza and the people of the West Bank, has been the tremendous popular response, the demonstrations, and as you say, you mentioned the terrific demonstration over the bridge in Sydney. This is something not only phenomenal, not only historic, but it expresses something. It says that people, this is the population who are not in government, are not being represented by their governments. It's that simple. Now, you can tell that these popular responses have had an effect already. You can tell because of the recognition of Palestinian statehood, which we've just seen at the United Nations, with the United Kingdom, with France, with other Western countries. That would never, ever have happened without these popular uprisings everywhere. These leaders felt they had to do something in response to their own populations. And I'm certain that that is the case. Now, of course, we can take heart from that. We can be encouraged by that. And I would say nobody would ever think, oh, nothing's happening just because the leaders aren't moving. No, things are happening. And I personally have no doubt that these waves of popular reaction will, in the end, change the whole situation. Our problem, though, is that it might not happen soon enough for the people of Gaza and the people of the West Bank. That is the thing that I fear.
Unfortunately, I mean, you're right. I mean, you spoke about the recognition as well. And, I wanted to ask what your reflection on, is this just a perfunctory statement that, empty, doesn't mean anything? What does it mean? How impactful is it for, long-term and short-term for Palestinians?
Yes, look, it's tempting to take the view that this recognition of statehood by these leaders who've done nothing whatever about the genocide, it's tempting to think that they've been shamed into doing something. And so they've opted for the thing that involves the least action on their part. So if they go around saying, yes, we recognize the Palestinian state, that's job well done, job done. That's the end of it. So in that sense, I think one can be forgiven for thinking that. However, I'm always struck by the law of unintended consequences. What I mean is that even though I think that it's true to say that these Western countries have, including Australia, of course, have been shamed into doing something like this, the action itself is having an effect, because what it does is it puts the Palestinian issue firmly in a legal framework. And it's very important. It's not just that you have occupied territories, and nobody knows what those are, the occupied territories in Palestine, but that this is a state. the Israeli army has invaded a state. It's not just a bunch of territories. I think this creates its own reality. And, things have begun to happen. I give you an example. In Britain, where I live, we have had, some of us have been working very, very hard on the medical angle to all this, which is to try and get the British Medical Association, because as you know, all states have got their own medical associations. So the British Medical Association, we've been trying to get them to do something about the outrages against doctors and against the whole medical structure in Gaza. And we've got nowhere, actually, until the last 2 days, when suddenly the British Medical Journal, which is very prestigious, is about to publish a very important paper about the medical situation in Gaza. And, this, in my view, this would not have happened without the recognition of statehood by the government. So if you like, putting it in a very simple way, it's become kosher to support the Palestinians.
To talk about the state of Palestine. But then some of the critics of this move, for example, they say that this is just a way that these governments are trying to absolve themselves from further practical actions. And just on top of that as well, I really want to hone in on that concept of state of Palestine. Are we going back to Oslo, two-state solution? Is that what we're kind of building out of that recognition?
Good question. Because, as you know, at the same time as this recognition of statehood has been happening, there's a lot of talk amongst the leaders of Western states about the so-called two-state solution. Now, the two-state solution was an idea that underpinned the Oslo Agreement, but that was around before the Oslo Agreement and has never gone away. The idea that two states for two people, on the surface, it looked for many years to all these countries that supported it, it looked like something reasonable. You could talk about you could preserve Israel, albeit in slightly smaller geographic area, and at the same time, you could give the Palestinians something for their sufferings. And so it looked to these Western leaders as if that was a really reasonable thing to do. Now, nothing could be further from the truth, for many reasons. The two-state solution is dead and buried. It should never be exhumed. It should never be talked about. It was unjust in the first place. You don't divide a country unequally, I might say, between the invaders and the colonists and between the indigenous people. You don't do that. So that for a start, it was no good. But secondly, we really have to talk about this, and these Westerlies never talk about it. Israel refuses to do it. Israel refuses to accept the two-state solution. And not only that, Israel is busy currently, as we speak, destroying the territory of the so-called Palestinian state. So, for all these reasons, this is a waste of rhetoric. It's a waste of time, and it's very counterproductive. And there is one final point I want to make. The idea of the two-state solution is to preserve Israel. That's what it's really about. So, in a way, if you could neutralize the threat from the Palestinians, who wanted some rights, by giving them a state, although in 20% of their territory, you could preserve Israel. And it seems to me that proposition now is really open to question. Do you really want to preserve the Israel you've seen in the last 2 years? Is that what we're about? What happens to the ideology, the brutality, the cruelty of the ruling ideology of Israel, which is Zionism? Do you want to preserve that? Really?
As Ali Abu Nama says, you can't negotiate a pizza while eating the actual pizza. So, you're actually building settlements, expanding settlements, and yet you're claiming that you're negotiating. But I want to drill a little bit deeper into that. So we will always say it's in the charter of the Likud party that no Palestinian state shall exist. And that's what Netanyahu and his government is implementing right now. Some say, the Labour Party back in the 90s were more genuine in their pursuit of that end. Do you buy that argument?
No, I think it was semantic. I think that the Labour position was on the surface more amenable, looked as if it was something reasonable. However, you need to look at people's actions, you see. It's no good looking at what they're saying. They did nothing. Rabin, who is lauded by some circles as being a peaceable and a peacemaker, and somebody that the Palestinians could talk to, what did he do about creating a Palestinian state? Not at all. He presided over an expansion of settlements, so making it ever harder to imagine a Palestinian state. So really, it doesn't matter what these Israeli politicians say. You have to look at what they do.
And that goes back to the ideology that is fueling the people, the society, the government. And that's the nature of the ideology. It's actually ever expansive. It's never going to be, content with limited borders.
Yes, and just to interrupt you a moment. Look, we need to actually pause about this ideology. It needs to be a matter of open discussion. The ideology of Zionism, rather like the ideology of Nazism or fascism, are not ideologies that can be accepted in democratic societies. And you have to look at it. The fact that Israel promotes this and practices this ideology, which is racist, which is oppressive, which seeks domination, it's supremacist. You can't live with an ideology like this, not in two states, not in any way at all.
Absolutely. There needs to be, I've been reading early this morning actually about the resolution that was adopted in 1975, Resolution 3379, which actually labels Zionism as a racist ideology. And then it was kind of revoked in 1991. So it's interesting to read that story because really we need to call the spade a spade, because it has been the root cause. So I want to talk about practical things that are happening now on the ground, in terms of practical things that can be done. Spain has signaled that it will provide support to the Sumud flotilla. Also the Italian Navy, the Sumud flotilla is a few ships, loaded with activists that are providing food and medical supplies. There have been recently calls in the UN member states to undertake the Uniting for Peace resolution, that was moved by, I think, Colombia, the resolution 377. So are we finally seeing, starting to see enough practical steps to actually stop the genocide? Are we seeing the end?
I would say that's too soon to predict. this is the start of a definite change in the way that concerned people, concerned populations, states, they've understood that taking up a position is not enough, and that you have to do more. And this is really important. Certainly, the Uniting for Peace facility provided by the UN General Assembly, which is really important. That means it can't be vetoed by the Security Council. This is a facility which is in the UN Charter, which permits states to get together and come to the rescue of people caught in the way that the people of Gaza are caught by Israel. This is really encouraging. And as you said, the offer of, well, Spain's behavior altogether, anyway, in terms of sanctions against Israel, etc., but its current offer of protection for the flotilla, and Italy's as well, are, yes, I accept what you say. I think this is the start of a change, because you see, the effect of that is that states that are sitting on their hands, like France, like Australia, like the United Kingdom, look at this and they don't look good. They look terrible. Watching this carnage and doing nothing to help a rescue series of boats which are trying to alleviate the sufferings of the people of Gaza, it doesn't look good. And I think something has really started, yes. And for all activists watching or, thinking of becoming activists, you should take heart. It does, in the end, there is a universal human conscience. There really is. And if you stir it hard enough and long enough, it will move. It will move. And this is what I think we're beginning to witness.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about really rehumanizing those individuals, people, because they've been indoctrinated in these kind of ideologies for decades and decades by this Hasbara machine. I mean, you mentioned the beginning of changes to the better. I mean, do you also see that in academia and media, for example, in general? Recently, we were seeing very gradual, slow kind of admission from the media that, yes, there is a genocide. They started arguing with Israeli spokespersons. Is that happening as well in the UK where you are, for example?
Not fully, I'm afraid. Not so. The problem with the media, and it's so good that you've mentioned that, the media, I think, is hugely responsible for the genocide. I tell you what I mean by that. The fact that they gave blanket excuses for Israeli behavior didn't cover very many Israeli outrages and maintained a policy of protecting Israel has been hugely influential in the way that the genocide has gone on and on. Now, if the media had from the start been done proper journalism and commented and reported on what was happening and did it in clearly condemnatory terms, didn't just say, oh, the Israeli army killed 800 people, end of story. You make it clear to the reader, the viewer, whatever, that these are not acceptable, these actions. This would have made an enormous difference. The media is difficult to say. It's very difficult to say that the media is changing in Britain, because there's a lot of conservative newspapers who represent the establishment, the British establishment. Nevertheless, it will begin to happen. It just all too slow. I think we said at the beginning, the tragedy is that it is so slow in terms of the accelerating genocide that the Israelis are perpetrating in Gaza.
Unfortunately, yes. And people of Gaza, I mean, alongside my family, they're telling me they can't believe that the world is actually allowing this to happen for this long. It's mind-boggling. I want to ask you my last question. I always ask my guests this question, and miraculously, most of the answers are aligned. So I'm keen to hear what's your vision for liberation in Palestine. And just on top of that, you mentioned Zionism. Does Zionism feature anywhere in that vision? And just to make it a little bit more complicated as well, how do we activate to achieve that vision? Because I had a conversation with Reverend Dr. Stephen Sizer the other day, and it's interesting that he mentioned two-state solution is too late and one-state solution is too soon. And then Ilan Pape said that we shouldn't be shopping for a solution in Western supermarkets. So I'm just keen to understand what you think of how liberation looks like.
Yeah. Look, in the end, I think there can be no doubt that the aim we want, what we have to aim for, is the return of the Palestinian exiles and refugees to Palestine. So the way I think of it, it's Palestinian-centered. It's not catering for the settlers. There's a body of opinion, particularly amongst anti-Zionist Jews, which is very concerned, understandably, with the future of Jews who don't subscribe to Zionism. What's going to happen to them, etc. My starting point is really not the settlers and their problems. It's the Palestinians. The Palestinian people have paid a very heavy price for the creation of Israel, and that has to come to an end. What does that mean? It means the return of all the Palestinians who were expelled from their homeland with their descendants. They have primacy. They have to go back to Palestine. Now, if one makes that the center and the aim of all activity that you're starting towards this eventual solution, you will soon come across the problem of the settlers. What do you do with these settlers? What do you do with them? Well, for a start, they need to be de-Zionized. There's no room for Zionism in a future state which includes them as well as the indigenous Palestinian people. There's no room for Zionism. It's an ideology which is absolutely contrary to liberation, to the kind of state that I'm envisioning. So they have to make a choice. Those settlers and their descendants have to make a choice. Do they want to maintain their Zionist belief, in which case they have no room in the Palestine of the future? They have to leave. They have to make a choice. It's very clear. Either you want to live in this particular part of the world, and if you do, you subscribe to the values of, hopefully the democratic values of the new state, or you leave. For me, it's really very clear that. And so in the end, you cannot avoid a probably large number of settler descendants. And I prefer to call them that because I think people should be very clear in their minds what we're talking about. Israelis are settlers, and their descendants are the descendants of settlers. This is what we need to understand. So we need to always use this terminology. So it's back to really the thing that will face the Palestinians hopefully in their homeland. What do you do with these settler communities who want to stay and who have can see themselves nowhere else, and this is going to happen. And therefore, you see, I think you cater for them because they become equal citizens. There is no other fair or just way to deal with them. However they came to Palestine, they're there. And, they will become equal citizens and hopefully will not suffer discrimination, etc. But what I really want to stress to people watching and listening, you see, the starting point of this talk about what presumably is a one democratic state in the future, the starting point is Palestinian rights. It's not how do you accommodate the Jewish Israelis and the Palestinian Arabs in one space. No, you first your starting point is how do you put right the injustices that have been visited on the Palestinian people. They have primacy. They have to return home. And then in that context, we talk about the population that is going to live in that new state.
And as Dr. Salman Abu Sitta mentioned, there's space for everyone. Most of the population now is concentrated in 12%, as he found in his research, on the land. And therefore, some people say, it's almost impossible, but it's actually legal, it's possible, and it's practical as well. So we need to internalize that there is a future, a decolonized future in Palestine. And
No, absolutely. And I think for all activists or would-be activists, please keep this in mind. This is not the end of the story. But it's going to need people working hard towards a proper end to the story, so that you don't perpetuate some form of injustice or other. The Palestinians have had enough of injustice. It's time they were given a break.
Couldn't agree more. What must happen to stop this genocide and to stop Netanyahu? I really sometimes hate it when people just aggregate all that violence, all that aggression, all that oppression and put it in the person of one individual, which is Netanyahu. Like, how do you respond to that question? How do we stop the genocide and stop Netanyahu?
Yes, first of all, I entirely agree with you. Putting it all onto Netanyahu, as if Netanyahu disappeared tomorrow, all would be well, is completely wrong. We know from opinion polls that leaving aside the government, the people, the Jewish population of Israel, supports the government. It supports the genocide. It supports the monstrous acts of the Israeli army. We know that. So you're dealing with the whole population. It's not Netanyahu. It's all of them together. Yes. So what are you going to do? Well, this is very, very hard. If you remember, I started by saying, let's look at why this is happening. Why are the states that could make a difference not doing anything? Now, I think, you see, this opens the way for activists to work locally. This is very important. If you get waylaid by world events, world currents, etc., you won't be useful. Work locally, because what you want is that in each state, in each Western state, which are the ones that are supporting Israel, you create a movement which is against the government support for Israel. That's how you have to do it. And you do it with fellow like-minded people, and you approach all the democratic representatives you have, and you make an almighty endless fuss, endless attack on these politicians who will not accept basic human rights. So I think this is how we have to start. Well, we don't have to start because we've already got a head start. We just build on it. That's all.
I mean, what are your comments on the BDS movement and how helpful it is? I mean, are sanctions useful?
Yeah, now look, the BDS movement is, of course, always useful, always, and must always be supported. But in reality, the thing that will make the difference to Israel is sanctions. And that is what, going back to the previous answer, that is what the activists ought to be demanding of their governments, sanctions against Israel. That really does make a difference. Yes, I accept that.
We're seeing some shy targeted sanctions on individuals, on certain businesses, but we really need to have some sort of umbrella sanctions on, larger sectors of the Israeli economy. I mean, that probably be more effective.
You see, for a start, you must stop all arms exports to Israel. But secondly, you sanction economically. Of course. And this affects and that brings me to say that one of the best arenas for sanctions and their effects is the European Union. If the European Union suspended the EU-Israel trade agreement, it would devastate the Israeli economy. There's no question. Our problem, of course, is that there are states within the European Union that support Israel. Now, it's, of course, the advice I gave to viewers where you are, it would be the same advice I give to the populations of those countries. They have to work on their own governments. This has to stop, and if popular opinion, which has already had an effect, as we discussed earlier, popular opinion really has had an effect. Build on it. Just make it more focused that what you're after is sanctions. And if you live in Europe, you need actually quite clearly to lobby the European governments in order to suspend the trade agreement with Israel. It would be highly effective.
This is a great moment in time. We have to push as hard as we can because of the amount of work that we've already done. We need to build on it. We are getting really, really closer. We can feel it. We can really feel it. Israel is being isolated. Our shameless government is not an exception. And, it's laughable. I just want to let you in on what our foreign minister is saying when she was accused of sending weapons to Israel. She's saying, we are sending non-lethal weapon parts to Israel. So this is how ridiculous. She probably doesn't hear herself saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I echo what you said. We need to push as hard as we can. Do you feel the Israelis will allow a peacekeeping force to enter? I feel, unfortunately, it's too late now for the Palestinians in Gaza.
I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I don't hold out much success for a peacekeeping force. Israel has already shown itself totally contemptuous of international systems of all sorts. You see, the problem is that the Israelis are emboldened by United States support. This is the problem. Indeed, you're right in terms of would they allow it? The answer is they almost certainly wouldn't, but it's worth doing. It's worth doing because it's very comforting for the people of Palestine to know that the world is trying to help them. And secondly, it's another nail in Israel's coffin, frankly, in terms of its reputation, and that, of course, opens the larger point, which we didn't discuss, which is the United States. Without the United, if you like, this is a kind of a chain, isn't it? the United States permits Israel, which Israel does its acts and behaves in the way it does. So you talk about how to stop it. Well, you've got to talk about the United States. I've chosen a path in which I think is at least it's doable. The United States is very difficult, but European countries ought to be open to, that includes Australia, it ought to be open to pressure from their own citizens.
Absolutely. I mean, usually the United States is the last country, like what happened in South Africa, is the last country to support what the global movement want, in terms of sanctions and boycott. But I want to hone in on this point. I mean, what is it going to take to stop that blind support from the United States to Israel?
Well, look, the Israelis are wholly dependent on the United States. I mean, that's what is an absolute scandal. They could not operate for another 5 minutes without US support. So really, so if you like, set aside Israel. Israel has a real problem. It's utterly and totally dependent on the US, which is why Netanyahu keeps going in order to tighten the screws on. I don't know what he's got on Trump, frankly, but that's what it looks like. There is some hold that he has on Trump, and hence Trump is unable to stand up to him. So long as that obtains, things are very difficult. In terms of Israel itself, there are, of course, other factors which we didn't mention, which is the internal Israeli situation. Israel on the inside is not healthy. There are schisms between the religious and the liberal. There are problems between different communities. There is a problem with the economy. Now, how serious all this is, I don't know. And I'm very much against, pronouncements which proclaim the end of Israel. They're premature, and I think they're exaggerated. Nevertheless, things are not well inside Israel itself, and that is also another factor.
I mean, the Israeli society has always been like this, fragment, because you're actually patching many people from completely different communities around the world, Yemenis Jews, Polish Jews, Russian Jews patching together. So there are already existing divisions, and now it's kind of widening. So it's a great point to make, but unfortunately we can't see how severe it is. The next question is about the flotilla. Just to imagine that the flotilla makes it to Gaza. What does that mean if it does?
Well, I think this is so hypothetical. Honestly, I can't answer it because I think the Israelis would rather bomb the hell out of all those boats than allow a single one to enter Gaza. They cannot afford to do it. They have, in their view, their policy is a total monopoly of the destruction of Gaza. And so an international collection of people on a boat coming along to offer aid symbolically is so powerful. The Israelis cannot afford to do it, and they're not going to do it. I'm very sorry to say, but I'm very pessimistic about the future of the flotilla. Not that it should not have happened, not at all, and not that it's a noble attempt, and it's again focused attention, the world's attention, on the outrage that is being committed in Gaza. So for all those reasons, absolutely worthwhile. But we've seen, the trouble is I can only go back on recent history. We've seen the way Israel behaves. If you remember the Mavi Marmara in 2010, they actually killed people on board those ships. So this we're dealing with the outlaws. I mean, the Israelis are outlaws. They don't respect anything at all. And so I'm not optimistic about chances of success in terms of, by that I mean, in terms of a boat actually arriving and being able to deliver aid. And as you know, the Israelis have already offered to take the aid from those ships and deliver it themselves. So, you know, that would be a last resort, of course.
Mm. Yeah, it's not a very optimistic situation, unfortunately. Do you see the Palestinian struggle as a product of the late stage capitalism, and is the larger front fighting the repression and inequality of the neoliberal fossil fuel economy and polity? Do you see all these movements, having the Palestinian movement now as a focus, as a front for all these movements?
Look, in terms of the effect, the capitalism, the role of capitalism, neoliberal economics, etc., these have come in to the arena, but they were not causative. They were not really, as far as I've read, they were not significant at the beginning. They have become significant as they've been able to exploit the situation. For example, we know that the armaments that are being tested in Gaza are being sold to international arms companies, and those arms companies and all those that hang around them are benefiting from this trade, this horrific. And Anthony Lowenstein, who's an Australian, has done a lot of work on what he calls the Palestine Laboratory, which is that this is a testing ground for capitalism. In the end, that's what it's feeding, and so in that sense, there really is a big part to play now. But I don't think the impetus at the beginning was in terms of capitalism and other economic systems.
We did a couple of conversations with Anthony about his book. It's absolutely brilliant, very cited, largely cited in Francesca Albanese's recent report. So in the end, Dr. Ghada, I don't want to take too much of your time. In the end, what is a message that you can give to the Australian audience to continue through these difficult times, really, through the genocide? How do we maintain activism? How do we maintain sanity and humanity as we mobilize and activate for Palestine?
Well, my first message is, please don't give up. Don't give up, because things are really beginning to change. This is now a moment to capitalize on. It's not a moment to give up at all. For all the reasons we discussed in the last hour, the fact that there is a recognition of Palestinian statehood, the fact that this is having an effect already, the fact that there are certain changes already taking place in some European countries. It's very encouraging, and one should regard it as the beginning of a wave of change which actually will be effective. So whatever you do, don't give up. But remember always that working together is the best way, because that guarantees more success than if you're working on your own. So get into groups, join groups that already exist, and maintain the pressure on your government. That's the key to all this, because it's the leadership of the world, it seems to me, that is the real pathology here, that they don't do anything, they don't want to know, they're trying all sorts of methods of evading their responsibilities. This is the target for us.
I couldn't agree more. And then thank you very much, Dr. Ghada, for your time. I'm really honored, and hopefully we'll can have you back again at some point.
Pleasure. It's been my pleasure. And thank you so much for allowing me the chance to tell you about my ideas.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You've been listening to The Palestinian Show, Red Inverted Triangle. If you'd like to learn more about Palestine, or if you'd like to get involved in the Palestine Solidarity Movement, please follow Palestine Justice Movement Sydney on Instagram or Facebook. And keep tuning in to Red Inverted Triangle. My name is Ahmed. I will see you next time.